A retired electrician in Massachusetts passed away in 2023 and left a basement full of what his children called old radio junk. Heavy metal boxes with glowing tubes, thick cloth-covered wiring, and dials that smelled like warm dust. They called a junk hauler and had everything removed in a single afternoon for $200. One of those boxes was a Fisher 500, the first true high-fidelity AM/FM mono receiver ever manufactured, with a brass-plated faceplate and a pair of EL37 output tubes that audiophiles and guitar amplifier builders fight over. A picker intercepted the haul before it reached the dump, pulled the Fisher and 2 other chassis from the pile, and resold them within the month for a combined $2,800. The family doesn't know. They never checked the model numbers. They saw heavy, ancient-looking equipment with exposed tubes and assumed it was worthless. That assumption is the most expensive mistake in the vintage audio market, and it happens every single week. There is a category of monotube receiver from the 1950s and early 1960s that was hand-wired, point-to-point soldered, and built with components so overspecified that the circuits are still running 70 years later. These receivers look like they belong in a wartime radio room. They're heavy, dusty, sometimes humming faintly, and always ugly by modern standards. Nobody under 50 recognizes the brands. Nobody under 40 knows what a mono receiver even is, and the people who do know are showing up at your estate sale with cash, not conversation. So here are 10 mono receivers that look like electrical scrap and sell like collector's gold, starting from the bottom and building to the one that could pay off your car. Number 10. The Heathkit AR3. This was a kit-built mono receiver from the late 1950s. You assembled it yourself from a box of parts, a soldering iron, and a Heathkit instruction manual. The result looks exactly like what it is: a homemade piece of electronics with hand-soldered connections, mismatched solder joints, and a chassis that might be slightly crooked depending on who built it. Nobody looks at a Heathkit and thinks valuable. They think hobby project. They think basement tinkering. But the AR3 used a 5-tube circuit with a 12A6 beam power output tube and coverage from 550 kilocycles to 30 megacycles across 4 bands. Well-built and properly restored examples now sell for $100 to $300. The tube kit alone sells for $45. You'll find one in a box marked Old Radios at an estate sale, priced at $5, because the family sees exposed wiring and thinks fire hazard. The person buying it sees a complete tube circuit with a military-grade output transformer underneath. Number 9. The Magnavox Console Chassis. This is not a standalone receiver. It's the tube amplifier and tuner section that Magnavox installed inside their massive wooden console stereos throughout the 1950s and 1960s. When a console gets thrown away, which happens constantly, the chassis usually goes with it. That's the mistake. Magnavox used push-pull 6V6 tube circuits, heavy output transformers, and point-to-point wiring that guitar amplifier builders consider some of the best ever put in a consumer product. A bare Magnavox mono chassis in working condition sells for $150 to $400 on the guitar amp conversion market alone. The tubes, the transformers, and the capacitors are each worth money individually. If someone is throwing out a Magnavox console, ask if you can have the chassis before it hits the curb. That metal box inside the wooden cabinet is the valuable part. The furniture is the part worth nothing. Number 8. The Lafayette KT200A. Lafayette was an electronics chain store that competed with Radio Shack and went bankrupt in the early 80s. Their monotube receivers were contract manufactured in Japan and sold through storefronts that no longer exist. The KT200A was an AM/FM mono receiver with a multi-tube circuit, a flywheel tuning dial, and a build quality that exceeded what the brand name suggested. Working units sell for $150 to $400. The brand is dead, the stores are gone, and the receivers are sitting in basements labeled as old junk from a store nobody remembers. If you recognize even one of these so far, hit like, because the list is about to climb into serious territory. Number 7. The Bogen RP40. Bogen was a company known for public address systems, school intercoms, paging equipment, not high fidelity. That association is the reason Bogen mono receivers end up in scrap piles. But the RP40 was Bogen's attempt at a hi-fi mono-tube receiver, and they applied the same rugged, over-engineered approach that made their PA systems last for decades. Heavy transformers, conservative tube biasing, and a sound that favored warmth and clarity over raw power. Serviced units sell for $200 to $500. The person scrapping one sees the Bogen name and thinks school hallway. The person buying one sees a point-to-point wired mono receiver built to PA-grade durability standards, which means it was designed to run all day, every day, without failure. That kind of reliability is what tube collectors pay for. Number 6. The Pilot 602. Pilot Radio Corporation was one of the original American hi-fi manufacturers, founded in the 1930s and completely forgotten by the general public by the 1970s. The 602 was their mono AM/FM tube receiver from the late 1950s, with a tuning eye indicator tube, a phono input stage, and a power section using EL84 output tubes that produced one of the sweetest mid-range tones in consumer audio. The company went through ownership changes, stopped making hi-fi equipment, and vanished. Serviced units sell for $250 to $600, but the name Pilot on a faceplate means absolutely nothing to anyone clearing out a house today. The brand recognition is zero. The collector demand is not. Number 5. The Grundig 5050W. A German monotube receiver, built like a bank vault and finished inside a massive wooden cabinet with a lighted dial, a ferrite bar antenna, and shortwave bands spanning frequencies that most American receivers never touched. Grundig was one of the largest electronics manufacturers in Europe during the 1950s, and the 5050W was their flagship mono console receiver. It used EL84 output tubes, multiple IF stages, and a tuner section that pulled in signals from across the Atlantic. In the United States, Grundig is known for shortwave radios you'd buy at Brookstone. In Europe, it was a name that commanded the same respect as Fisher or Scott. Serviced examples sell for $300 to $700. The wooden cabinet alone, if intact, adds value. Do not strip it. Do not refinish it. The original finish is authentication, not damage. Number 4. The Harman Kardon Festival TA1080. Harman Kardon was one of the founding brands of American high fidelity, and the Festival was their mono AM/FM tube receiver from the late 1950s. Gold-plated faceplate, a warm tube circuit using EL84 output tubes, and a build quality that reflected Sidney Harman's obsession with measured performance. The Festival name was used across several models, but the TA1080 is the one collectors chase. Serviced units sell for $300 to $800. Non-working units still sell for over $100 because the gold faceplate, the output transformers, and the tubes are worth money on their own. If you see a gold-faced receiver at an estate sale with the Harman Kardon name and a single speaker output, do not walk past it. That's a mono unit. That's the one. Number 3. The Sherwood S2000. Sherwood was a Chicago-based company that built some of the finest tuner circuits in American hi-fi history, and almost nobody remembers them. The S2000 was their mono AM/FM tube receiver, and it used a tuner section so sensitive that it regularly outperformed dedicated FM tuners costing twice as much. The amplifier stage was modest in power but extraordinarily clean, using a push-pull EL84 configuration with negative feedback that kept distortion below 1%. Serviced units sell for $400 to $900. Sherwood occupies the same dead zone as Nico and Optonica in the solid-state era. The engineering was first-rate. The marketing was invisible, and the receivers end up at yard sales priced like paperweights because nobody in the room has ever heard the brand. Now pay close attention, because the last two are where this list stops being about good finds and starts being about the kind of money that makes you wish you'd checked the basement sooner. Number 2. The H.H. Scott 320. Herman Hosmer Scott founded his company in Maynard, Massachusetts, and branded every product with the word laboratory because that's what his engineering facility actually was. The 320 was a mono AM/FM tube receiver that used a circuit derived from Scott's acclaimed 310 tuner and 210 amplifier, combining them into a single chassis with the same precision and the same laboratory-grade tolerances. Scott's mono receivers are considered among the finest sounding tube components of the 1950s, and the 320 is one of the most sought after. Serviced examples sell for $500 to $1,500. The heavy steel chassis, the point-to-point wiring, and the laboratory designation on the faceplate are the collector tells. The word laboratory is not marketing. It's a description of where and how this receiver was designed. Number 1. The Fisher 500, the original mono. The first true high-fidelity AM/FM receiver ever manufactured. Avery Fisher launched the Fisher Radio Corporation in 1945 and spent a decade building separate tuners and amplifiers before combining them into a single chassis in the late 1950s. The result was the Fisher 500, a mono receiver using two EL37 output tubes, a brass-plated faceplate, and an optional mahogany or blonde wood case that turned it into a piece of furniture. The EL37 is a European power tube that hasn't been manufactured in decades, and a matched pair alone can sell for over $100. The Fisher 500 was the receiver that proved you could put a tuner and an amplifier in the same box without sacrificing sound quality, and it set the template that every receiver manufacturer would follow for the next 40 years. Serviced examples in original wood cases sell for $600 to $1,800. Units with original documentation and the optional multiplex adapter command premiums that push well past $2,000. If you find one in a closet, in an attic, behind a stack of old records, do not plug it in, do not attempt to test it, and above all, do not let anyone tell you it's just an old radio. It is not a radio. It is the beginning of the modern receiver, and the person offering you $20 for it knows that. Here's the pattern. Every one of these mono receivers was hand-wired, point-to-point soldered, and built with tubes and transformers that cannot be replicated at any price today. The value was never in the case. It was in the circuit underneath, in the iron of the output transformer, in the glass of the tubes, and in the wiring that connects them. So before you scrap it, before you strip it, before you let anyone haul it away with the rest of the junk, flip it over, read the brand and the model number, and check what it's sold for. Not listed, sold. If you've got any old tube equipment at home, comment below and tell me what it is. I'd be happy to take a look. And if this changed how you think about that heavy box in the basement, subscribe, because the collectors already know this list. Now you do too.